There's a world beneath the waves that most of us will never see. A world so vast, so dark, and so profoundly alien that it might as well exist on another planet entirely. It is a place where pressure crushes steel, where sunlight has never reached, where temperatures hover just above freezing, and where creatures have evolved over hundreds of millions of years into some of the most extraordinary forms of life this planet has ever produced. And ruling over much of this hidden realm, darting through the blackness with liquid grace, flashing light from their own bodies, reaching out with arms that think for themselves, are the squids. Not the small, rubbery creatures you might recognize from a seafood menu or a saltwater aquarium, but massive, complex, deeply mysterious animals that have haunted human imagination since the first sailors looked out over the open ocean and wondered what moved beneath them. Welcome to one of the most fascinating journeys you will ever take. Today, we are diving deep, and we mean that in every sense of the word. We are going to peel back the surface of the ocean and explore the extraordinary universe that lies beneath it. We are going to trace the evolutionary story of squids across hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history, from their shelled and ancient ancestors crawling through primordial seas, all the way to the sleek, intelligent, and utterly remarkable animals alive in our oceans right now. We are going to examine how these creatures survive in conditions that would kill most life almost instantly. We are going to look at the biology of animals that seem almost designed by science fiction, animals that can change color in milliseconds, that produce their own light, that have nervous systems unlike anything else on Earth, and that play roles in our global climate that scientists are only beginning to fully understand. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos, because what we are about to explore together is the kind of story that changes the way you think about life on this planet forever. Let us begin at the beginning, not the beginning of squids, but the beginning of the ocean itself, because to truly understand these animals, you have to understand the world they inhabit. The ocean is not a single place. It is not a uniform body of water stretching from coast to coast and from surface to floor. It is in reality a collection of distinct environments stacked on top of one another, each one more extreme than the last, each one home to its own communities of life, each one operating according to its own rules and rhythms. And the squids, more than almost any other group of animals, have figured out how to live in virtually every one of those environments. The surface of the ocean, the sunlit zone that most of us imagine when we think of the sea, extends only about 200 meters down. This is the world of sunlight and photosynthesis, where tiny plant-like organisms called phytoplankton use the energy of the sun to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and organic matter. This is the foundation of nearly all ocean life, the place where energy first enters the marine food web. And even here in the most familiar and accessible layer of the ocean, squids are already at work, hunting, being hunted, reproducing, and dying in a cycle that has continued without interruption for an almost incomprehensible span of geological time. Below 200 meters, the sunlight begins to fail. This is the twilight zone, the mesopelagic region, where only the faintest blue glimmers of light reach from above and where the temperature drops sharply. Here, the pressure begins to build, not enough to crush a human diver on the spot, but enough to be felt, enough to change the properties of water itself, enough to require specialized physiological adaptations in the animals that call this region home. And the twilight zone is absolutely teeming with life. Billions upon billions of animals live here, many of them making daily journeys up toward the surface at night to feed, and then retreating back into the relative safety of the depths before dawn. Among these daily migrants, squids are among the most numerous and the most important. Deeper still, below about 1,000 meters, lies the midnight zone, the bathypelagic region. Here, there is no light at all. Not a single photon of sunlight has ever reached this depth. The pressure here is more than 100 times what we experience at the surface. The temperature is a few degrees above freezing, and it stays that way year-round, season after season, millennium after millennium, because the sun's warmth never penetrates this far. And yet life persists here too, life that has had hundreds of millions of years to figure out how to survive in these conditions. Life that has evolved solutions to the problem of darkness, cold, and crushing pressure that are so elegant and so strange that they continue to astonish scientists every time a new expedition brings back footage of the deep ocean floor. And finally, below the midnight zone, below 3,000 meters and extending all the way to the deepest trenches on Earth, places like the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, which reaches nearly 11,000 meters below the surface, lies the hadal zone. Named for Hades, the ancient Greek underworld, the hadal zone is the most extreme environment on Earth. The pressures here are more than 1,000 times what we experience at the surface. The darkness is absolute. The temperatures are just barely above freezing, and even here, even at these almost incomprehensible depths, life exists. Even here, some squids have been recorded. To put all of this in perspective, consider this. The average depth of the ocean is about 3,688 meters. The ocean covers more than 70% of the surface of our planet. This means that the largest habitable environment on Earth, by volume, by far the largest, is the deep sea. And yet, as of the time this documentary was produced, we have explored less than 20% of it. Less than 20%. The deep ocean remains in many ways more mysterious and less understood than the surface of the moon. And somewhere in all of that unexplored, unmapped, barely imagined vastness, squids are going about their lives, hunting, hiding, communicating, mating, and dying, as they have been doing for longer than any of us can truly comprehend. So where did they come from? How did squids come to be the animals they are today? To answer that question, we need to go back, a very long way back, to a time when the oceans were populated by creatures so different from anything alive today that they seem almost like creatures from a dream. The story of squids is really the story of cephalopods, the class of mollusks to which squids belong, along with octopuses, cuttlefish, and the chambered nautilus. And the story of cephalopods begins more than 500 million years ago, during a period geologists call the Cambrian, a time when life was exploding in diversity for the first time, when animals with hard shells and complex body plans were appearing in the fossil record in rapid succession, filling ecological niches that had previously been empty and setting the stage for every complex ecosystem that would follow. The earliest cephalopods were modest creatures. They lived inside straight or gently curved shells, using those shells partly for protection and partly for buoyancy. The shells were divided into chambers, and the animal could adjust the amount of gas in each chamber to control whether it sank or floated. Think of it as a very primitive, very ancient version of the ballast tanks used in modern submarines. These early cephalopods were small, probably just a few centimeters long, and they were likely slow-moving predators, using primitive grasping appendages to catch whatever prey they could find in the shallow coastal seas of the early Paleozoic. But then something remarkable happened. These animals began to diversify, and they diversified with extraordinary speed and success. By the Ordovician period, roughly 480 million years ago, cephalopods had become among the dominant predators of the ocean. Some species grew to enormous sizes. There are fossil records of straight-shelled cephalopods called orthocones that reached lengths of more than 9 meters. 9 meters. These were among the largest animals on Earth at the time, apex predators in a world that had not yet seen fish evolve into their modern forms, in a world that had not yet seen anything crawl onto land. The ocean of the Ordovician and the Silurian periods, roughly 500 to 400 million years ago, would have been an almost unrecognizable place to us, and yet in some ways deeply familiar. There were reefs, though they were built by different organisms than the coral reefs we know today. There were vast schools of small invertebrates, ancient relatives of shrimp and crabs and worms. There were the first jawless fish filtering food from the water column. And moving among all of these creatures, the cephalopods, shelled, powerful, and increasingly sophisticated, were already at the top of the food chain. Over the following hundreds of millions of years, cephalopods continued to diversify. The ammonites, perhaps the most famous extinct cephalopods, appeared and became extraordinarily abundant, their coiled shells preserving so well in rock that they are among the most commonly found fossils on Earth today. At their peak, ammonites were represented by thousands of species, living in oceans around the world, occupying every depth and every environment the sea offered. They survived multiple mass extinctions, adapting and re-radiating again and again over the course of more than 300 million years. But the shelled cephalopods were not the only line of evolution. Alongside the ammonites and their relatives, another lineage was developing, a lineage that would eventually give rise to the squids, the octopuses, and the cuttlefish we know today. This lineage was moving in a fundamentally different direction. Instead of investing more and more in elaborate protective shells, these animals were beginning to reduce their shells, to internalize them, to trade the protection of a hard outer casing for the freedom of movement and flexibility that comes with a softer body. This was one of the great evolutionary gambles in the history of life. A shell is protective, but it is also constraining. It limits how fast an animal can move, how flexible it can be, how quickly it can change direction when a predator attacks. By reducing the shell and eventually eliminating it almost entirely, replacing it in squids with a thin internal structure called the gladius or pen, which functions as a lightweight supportive backbone. These ancient cephalopods were trading one set of advantages for another. They were giving up armor in exchange for speed, agility, and flexibility. And that gamble paid off spectacularly. The squids and their relatives became among the most successful predators the ocean has ever seen. Without the weight and bulk of a large shell, they could swim faster, change direction more quickly, and occupy a wider range of ecological niches. They developed sophisticated eyes that, remarkably, evolved independently from vertebrate eyes but ended up with a nearly identical structure, one of the most stunning examples of convergent evolution in biology. They developed complex color-changing skin, filled with specialized cells called chromatophores that could expand and contract in milliseconds to produce an almost infinite variety of patterns and colors. They developed ink sacs to confuse predators and jet propulsion systems to escape from danger with explosive bursts of speed. By the time the dinosaurs appeared on land, roughly 230 million years ago, squids and squid-like creatures were already well established in the world's oceans. And when the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, and wiped out not only the non-avian dinosaurs but also the ammonites, which had survived everything the planet had thrown at them for over 300 million years, the squids survived. They survived and they thrived and they diversified into the nearlies that are alive across every ocean on Earth, from the polar regions to the tropics, from the sunlit surface to the deepest trenches. The squids are, in the most literal sense, survivors. They are the product of more than 500 million years of continuous evolutionary refinement, tested by every extinction event, every climate shift, every change in ocean chemistry that the planet has gone through. They have outlasted the trilobites, the ammonites, the plesiosaurs, and the mosasaurs. They were before the first trees grew on land, and they will almost certainly be here long after we are gone. And understanding them, truly understanding what they are and how they live and why they matter, is one of the most fascinating biology. Now, with that evolution in place, let us begin to look more closely at the animals themselves. Because the diversity of living squid species is truly remarkable, these are not all variations on a single theme, from creatures barely a centimeter long to animals that may reach lengths of 14 meters or more. They live at every depth of the ocean. They have evolved radically different strategies for finding food, avoiding predators, communicating with one another, and reproducing. And each one of those strategies is a story. Let us start close. In the sunlit and twilight zone, familiar squid species live. These are the animals most likely to end up on a dinner plate or in a museum jar, and yet even the most familiar species are remarkable when you look at them closely. Take the common market squid, the Dorytuthis opalescens, a small, streamlined animal reaching about 30 centimeters in length, found in great abundance along temperate coastlines. These animals are extraordinarily social during the breeding season, gathering in massive aggregations of thousands or even tens of thousands of individuals in shallow coastal waters. The males compete intensely for females, displaying rapid, shimmering patterns of color and light across their skin, patterns that can change faster than the human eye can fully track. A male squid in breeding display is running a light show across his own body, shifting from silver to brown to blue to white and back again in fractions of a second, advertising his fitness to females and warning rival males to keep their distance. But even this familiar display of color is more complex than it first appears. Scientists studying squid color change have discovered that these animals are not simply using color as decoration. They are communicating. The patterns they display carry information about identity, about reproductive status, about intention. And the remarkable thing is that squids can display different patterns on different sides of their body simultaneously. A male squid in a competitive situation might be displaying a courtship pattern to a female on his right, while simultaneously displaying an aggressive warning pattern to a rival male on his left. He is, in effect, having two completely different conversations at the same time, one on each side of his body. This ability to split the body's signals in this way requires a nervous system of considerable sophistication, and it points toward one of the most extraordinary features of squid biology that we will explore in much greater detail later in this documentary: the remarkable complexity and distributed nature of the squid nervous system. But for now, let us stay close to the surface and continue exploring the diversity of life here. One of the most visually spectacular squid species found in coastal and near-surface waters is the Wadacenia scintillans, commonly known as the firefly squid or sparkling inope squid. This is a small animal reaching only about 6 centimeters in length, found primarily in the western Pacific Ocean, and particularly abundant in the deep bay known as Toyama Bay in Japan. And the reason for its common names becomes immediately apparent when you see it. This animal is covered in light-producing organs called photophores, and it uses them to create displays of bioluminescence that are among the most beautiful natural phenomena on Earth. Each firefly squid carries hundreds of photophores distributed across its body, tentacles, and eyes. These photophores are not simple, passive light-emitting structures. They are complex organs with lenses and reflectors built into them, capable of focusing and directing light in specific directions. The squids use these lights for multiple purposes: for communication with potential mates, for signaling to other members of their species, and for a remarkable phenomenon called counter-illumination. Counter-illumination is a strategy used by many ocean animals living in the twilight zone. By producing light from their undersides that matches the faint light filtering down from above, they actively erase their own silhouette when viewed from below. A predator looking up would normally see the dark outline of any animal above it silhouetted against the lighter water. But a squid practicing counter-illumination disappears. It matches its light output to the ambient light above, making itself effectively invisible. The reproductive migrations of the firefly squid are legendary in Japan. Every year from March through June, millions of these tiny animals migrate from the deep water of the Pacific into Toyama Bay to spawn. As they gather in the shallows during the night hours, the bay lights up with their bioluminescent displays, blue-white flashes rippling across the water's surface, turning the bay into something that looks less like a natural phenomenon and more like a vision from a dream. Local fishermen have observed and harvested this migration for centuries, and the spectacle has become a famous tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world who come to witness the extraordinary display of living light. But why does this migration happen? Why do animals that live in deep water come into the relatively shallow, bright, and exposed environment of a coastal bay to reproduce? The answer, as is so often the case in biology, has to do with food. The waters of Toyama Bay are extraordinarily rich in nutrients during the spring, supporting dense populations of the tiny crustaceans and fish larvae that the firefly squid feed on. The abundance of food supports rapid growth and development of the eggs and hatchlings. By timing the migration to coincide with this seasonal bloom, the squids are giving their offspring the best possible start in life, and paying for that advantage with the considerable risk of being caught in the shallow, exposed waters of the bay. This pattern, deep water animals migrating toward more productive shallow waters to reproduce, is one we will see repeated in different forms throughout this documentary. It reflects a fundamental truth about ocean ecosystems. The surface waters, despite being more dangerous and more exposed, are where the food is. They are where the sun's energy enters the system, where the phytoplankton grow, where the zooplankton graze, where the food web begins. And almost everything in the ocean, from the smallest fish to the largest squid, is shaped in some way by the need to access that surface productivity while managing the risks that come with shallow water exposure. Let us now descend, let us leave the surface and the near-surface waters behind and move into deeper, darker, and more mysterious territory. Let us go to the zone where one of the most iconic and most studied deep-sea creatures in history makes its home, the zone where the giant squid lives, the Architeuthis ducks, the giant squid. If any animal in the history of marine biology has captured the human imagination more completely, it is difficult to name it. For centuries, this animal existed primarily in mythology, in the stories of sailors who claim to have seen tentacles as thick as a man's body reaching up from the water to drag ships down into the depths, in the Norse legend of the Kraken, a monster so vast that sailors sometimes mistook it for an island and made the mistake of landing on it, in the tales of Herman Melville and Jules Verne that made the deep-sea monster a staple of popular culture. But in the world of science, for most of modern history, the giant squid was known only from fragments, from decomposing bodies washed up on beaches, from tentacles and arms found in the stomachs of sperm whales, from beaks recovered from the digestive systems of deep-diving cetaceans. The existence of the giant squid was never seriously in doubt among zoologists. The physical evidence was too abundant, too consistent, and too widespread for this to be a mythological invention. Dead and dying giant squids had been washing ashore on beaches around the world for centuries, in Newfoundland, in New Zealand, in Norway, in the Azores, and they had been collected, measured, and described by scientists since the 19th century. The largest confirmed specimens measured from the tip of the mantle to the end of the long, club-tipped feeding tentacles exceeded 13 meters in length, with eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes of any known animal on Earth. These were obviously real animals, but nobody had ever seen one alive in its natural habitat. Nobody had ever filmed one in the deep ocean. Nobody knew exactly how it behaved, how it hunted, or what its life was actually like. The problem was simply one of access. The giant squid lives in the mesopelagic and bathopelagic zones, in depths ranging from roughly 300 meters to perhaps over 1,000 meters below the surface. These are depths where traditional diving equipment cannot reach, where the pressure is more than 30 times what we experience at the surface, where darkness is nearly absolute. The technologies needed to observe animals at these depths in their natural state, without disturbing them, without killing them, while capturing high-quality images, did not exist until relatively recently. The first breakthrough came in 2004, when a team of Japanese researchers managed to photograph a live giant squid for the first time in history. Working from a research vessel in the North Pacific, the team used a baited camera system lowered to a depth of about 900 meters to capture a series of still photographs of a living Architeuthis. The images were extraordinary. They showed a large animal, clearly a giant squid, approaching the bait and becoming hooked on one of the lures. Over the next several hours, the squid fought to free itself, eventually escaping but leaving behind a 2-meter-long tentacle in the process. The photographs were published in the scientific journal Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2006, and they created an immediate sensation. For the first time, human beings had documentary evidence of a living giant squid in its natural habitat, but still photographs, while thrilling, were not the same as video. They could capture a moment but could not convey the reality of how this animal moved, how it hunted, how it interacted with its environment. And so the research continued and the technology continued to improve. In 2012, another team of Japanese researchers, working in collaboration with a major television production company, managed the next historic milestone. They captured the first video footage of a live giant squid in its natural deep ocean habitat. The footage is breathtaking even now, even having been viewed millions of times since its initial broadcast. The camera, lowered to a depth of about 630 meters in the North Pacific Ocean, shows a living giant squid approaching out of the darkness, not creeping cautiously toward the bait as one might expect of a shy, retiring animal, but coming in decisively, almost aggressively, arms outstretched, the massive golden eye catching the light of the camera system. The squid is enormous clearly, but it does not move the way a large, ungainly creature might move. It moves with precision and purpose, adjusting its orientation rapidly, the chromatophores across its mantle rippling in complex patterns. And then it is gone again, back into the darkness from which it came, as if the deep ocean itself had briefly offered a glimpse of its greatest secret and then taken it back. What this footage and the growing body of scientific work around the giant squid has revealed is an animal far more active and more dynamic than the mythological sea monster of popular imagination. The Kraken of legend was imagined as something passive, a vast, malevolent intelligence lurking at the bottom of the sea, waiting for ships to come close enough to drag down. The real Architeuthis is something different, an active predator, a creature that moves through the mid-water column hunting prey, that has developed some of the most sophisticated sensory systems of any invertebrate, and that clearly possesses behavioral complexity that we are only beginning to understand. The giant squid's eyes, for example, those dinner plate-sized organs that are so immediately striking in any photograph, are not just remarkable for their size. They are remarkable for what that size suggests about the animal's visual world. Eyes in animal evolution do not grow larger without reason. Large eyes collect more light, they are better at detecting objects in low-light environments. The giant squid's eyes are the largest of any living animal, with a diameter of up to about 27 centimeters. At those depths, at those pressures, in that near-total darkness, why would an animal need eyes that large? The answer that researchers have proposed is simultaneously straightforward and astonishing. The giant squid evolved those enormous eyes to detect the approach of sperm whales. Sperm whales are the primary predator of giant squids, and they are remarkable animals themselves, capable of diving to depths of more than 2,000 meters in pursuit of their prey. But sperm whales, as large, fast-moving animals, are not invisible. As they move through the deep ocean, their bodies disturb the bioluminescent organisms that are present at those depths, creating faint but detectable trails of light. And the giant squid's enormous eyes, researchers believe, are sized precisely to detect those faint bioluminescent disturbances from a distance, giving the squid enough warning to attempt an escape before the whale arrives. This hypothesis, proposed and developed by researchers at institutions including the University of Copenhagen and later refined by scientists studying animal vision, is a fascinating window into the evolutionary arms race that plays out in the deep ocean. Predator and prey are constantly driving each other's evolution. The whale becomes a better diver, the squid evolves better early warning systems, the squid becomes faster and more evasive, the whale develops more sophisticated echolocation. It is an ancient war being fought in near total darkness, thousands of meters below the surface, and the weapons in that war are measured in visual acuity and swimming speed, and the sensitivity of acoustic detection rather than in claws or teeth. The sperm-whale connection is worth dwelling on for a moment because it reveals something important about the giant squid's place in the deep ocean ecosystem. Sperm whales feed almost exclusively on cephalopods, and a very large proportion of their diet consists of squid, in many cases giant squid. Studies of sperm whale stomach contents and fecal samples have found giant squid beaks, the hard, chitin-based mouthparts of the squid, which are essentially indigestible and accumulate in the whale's digestive system, in quantities that suggest sperm whales consume enormous numbers of these animals. In some populations, individual sperm whales appear to specialize in hunting giant squids, and the scars left by squid suckers, the rings of sharp chitin around each sucker that the squid uses to grip its prey, are visible on the skin of many sperm whales, documenting the struggles that occur in the darkness of the deep ocean between two of the planet's most extraordinary large animals. This relationship between giant squids and sperm whales is one of the most famous examples of a deep-sea ecological interaction, but it is also representative of a broader pattern. Squids of many different species are among the most important prey items for a huge range of large ocean predators, including toothed whales, seabirds, large fish, and even other squid species. The sheer abundance of squids in the ocean and their presence at virtually every depth makes them an essential link in the food chain, connecting the productivity of the surface waters to the large predators that depend on them. But the giant squid, remarkable as it is not the largest squid on Earth. That distinction belongs to an even more mysterious animal, one that most people, even people with a keen interest in marine biology, have never heard of, the Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni. The colossal squid. If the giant squid has the longer overall length, its two long feeding tentacles can extend its total length to 14 meters or more. The colossal squid has the greater mass. It is a stockier, more heavily built animal, with a larger mantle and more powerful arms. The largest confirmed specimen of the colossal squid, captured by a fishing vessel in the Southern Ocean in 2007, weighed approximately 495 kilograms, almost half a metric ton. Its mantle alone was about 2.5 meters long. Its eyes were even larger than those of the giant squid, about 30 centimeters in diameter, the largest eyes of any animal ever recorded. The colossal squid lives in the deep waters of the Southern Ocean, surrounding Antarctica, one of the most remote and least explored regions of the world's oceans. It is the primary prey of Antarctic sperm whales, and its beaks are found in the stomachs of these whales with great regularity. It is also hunted by sleeper sharks, large, slow-moving, deep-water sharks that appear to be among the few fish predators capable of taking on an adult colossal squid. But what the colossal squid hunts, how it hunts, and what its life is like in the depths of the Southern Ocean remain almost entirely mysterious. What we do know about the colossal squid's anatomy has revealed some extraordinary features. Unlike many other large squids, which use suckers lined with sharp chitin rings to grip their prey, the colossal squid has hooks on its tentacles, sharp, swiveling hooks that can rotate in their sockets, allowing the squid to grip prey more securely than any sucker system could. These hooks, found on the club-like ends of the long feeding tentacles as well as on the shorter arms, are clearly weapons, tools for capturing and holding prey that may be struggling violently to escape. They speak of an animal that is not a passive ambush predator, but an active hunter capable of taking on substantial prey. The colossal squid also appears to have a metabolic strategy quite different from what you might expect of such a large predator. Analysis of its body composition suggests that it has an extremely low metabolic rate. It burns energy very slowly, which makes sense in the cold, food-sparse environment of the deep Southern Ocean. This low metabolic rate means that the colossal squid does not need to eat very frequently to sustain itself. Unlike a warm-blooded predator like a sperm whale, which must consume large quantities of food to maintain its body temperature and fuel its active lifestyle, the colossal squid can afford to be patient to find a good position, perhaps near the bottom of the deep ocean or in the mid-water column, and wait for prey to come within reach rather than expending energy in active pursuit. This combination of enormous size, powerful weaponry, and slow metabolism paints a picture of a very different kind of apex predator than the ones we are most familiar with from the terrestrial world. The colossal squid is not the lion of the deep ocean. It is not a creature that spends its days in vigorous pursuit of prey. It is something more like an ambush specialist, a creature that combines patience with power, waiting for opportunities and then seizing them with devastating effectiveness when they arise. And in the cold, dark, resource-limited world of the deep Southern Ocean, that strategy appears to work extraordinarily well. But we have been focusing on the giants, and the world of deep-sea squids is not only a world of giants. It is also a world of the strange, the unexpected, and the beautifully bizarre. Let us take some time to explore a few of the more unusual and less well-known members of the squid world, because some of the most scientifically interesting stories in this field involve animals that most people have never heard of. Consider the Magnapinna, the bigfin squids. These are among the most mysterious animals in the ocean, known primarily from video footage captured by remotely operated vehicles working in deep water around the world, in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. The footage, when it was first shared publicly, caused immediate and widespread astonishment among both scientists and the general public, because what the videos showed was simply unlike anything anyone had expected to find in the deep ocean. The Magnapinna squids have an immediately distinctive silhouette. Their fins, the wing-like structures that most squids use for slow maneuvering and stability, are unusually large relative to the size of their mantle, giving the animals a broad-shouldered, almost alien appearance. But the truly extraordinary feature of these animals is their arms and tentacles. Unlike any other known squid, the Magnapinna hold their arms at right angles to their mantle, and then turn them downward at another right angle, so that each arm has a distinctive elbow-like bend and then hangs straight down. And from the tips of those arms hang long, thin, trailing filaments that can extend to lengths of several meters. In some individuals, the filaments appear to be more than 6 times the length of the entire rest of the body. No one has ever captured a live Magnapinna for study. No fresh specimen has ever been recovered. Everything we know about these animals comes from video footage that, because of the difficulties of deep-sea observation, is inevitably imperfect. We do not know exactly how many species of Magnapinna exist, though genetic analysis of the partial specimens that have been recovered suggests there are at least several. We do not know how large they can grow. Some of the footage suggests animals with mantles of perhaps 1 to 2 meters, suggesting total body lengths, including those extraordinary trailing filaments, of potentially 5 or 6 meters or more. And we do not know exactly how they feed, but the trailing filaments give us our best clue. The tentacles and arms of most squid species are covered with suckers and sometimes hooks, tools for grabbing and holding prey. The trailing filaments of Magnapinna squids are also covered with suckers, tiny suckers, arranged densely along the length of each filament. And the posture the animal assumes when it is hanging motionless in the water column, arms at right angles, filaments hanging down, looks remarkably like a fishing net or a trap. The hypothesis among researchers is that the Magnapinna squids may be using their long, sucker-covered filaments as passive capture devices, drifting slowly through the water with those filaments spread around them, waiting for small animals to blunder into contact with the suckers and become stuck. This would be a radically different feeding strategy from what we see in most squid species, which are active, fast-moving pursuit predators. If the Magnapinna hypothesis is correct, these animals have found a way to exploit the deep ocean's resources with minimal energy expenditure, hanging in the darkness like a living spider's web, waiting for food to come to them. And given the food-sparse conditions of the deep ocean, this strategy may be extremely effective. The Magnapinna squids are a reminder that the deep sea still holds enormous secrets, and that new and genuinely surprising discoveries are still being made. These animals were not formally described in the scientific literature until 1998, based on a single juvenile specimen, and the dramatic video footage that revealed their adult form to the scientific community came later still. They represent a lineage of squids that has been living in the deep ocean for what is presumably a very long time, pursuing a way of life completely different from anything their nearest relatives do, right under our noses, or rather, right beneath our feet, without anyone knowing they existed until the development of deep-sea ROV technology made their observation possible. Let us turn now to another remarkable species, one that represents a fundamentally different approach to the challenges of deep-sea life. The Taningia danai, sometimes called the Dana octopus squid or the two-finned octopus squid, is one of the larger deep-sea squid species, with adult mantles reaching up to about 1.5 meters and a total body weight that can exceed 60 kilograms. It is found throughout the tropical and subtropical regions of the world ocean, typically at depths of several hundred to over 1,000 meters. What makes Taningia danai immediately distinctive is its arms. Unlike most squid species, which have 10 limbs, 8 arms, and 2 longer feeding tentacles, adult Taningia danai lack the 2 long feeding tentacles entirely. This is unusual in itself, and it suggests that these animals hunt in a fundamentally different way from most squids, since the long tentacles are typically the primary weapons used to capture prey. But the really extraordinary feature of this animal is what it has at the tips of 2 of its 8 arms, a pair of the largest photophores, light-producing organs, of any known. These photophores, located at the tips of the second pair of arms, can reach the size of a lemon, and they are capable of producing flashes of bright blue-white light. For a long time, researchers could only speculate about what these enormous light-producing organs were used for. Were they used for communication with potential mates? Were they used for counter-illumination? Were they signals to conspecifics, helping individuals of the same species identify one another in the darkness? All of these hypotheses were considered and discussed, but without direct observation of live animals in their natural habitat, no one could say for certain. Then in 2006, researchers managed to attach data recording tags to several Taningia danai individuals caught during research cruises, and the data from these tags, combined with video footage captured during the capture process, provided the first real insight into how these animals actually behave. The footage showed something nobody had anticipated. As the Taningia approached objects, including the researchers themselves, it produced rapid, intense flashes of light from its arm-tip photophores. Not slow, communicative pulses, but rapid, stroboscopic bursts of light, blinding flashes directed outward from the tips of the arms in the direction the animal was facing. The researchers' interpretation was immediate and exciting. The Taningia danai was using its light-producing organs as weapons. Not weapons in the conventional sense, not to produce heat or shock or physical force, but as sensory weapons. By flashing intensely bright light at a potential prey item, the squid might temporarily blind the prey, disrupting its ability to escape. Or it might use the brief flash of illumination to assess the distance and size of a target before committing to an attack, essentially using its own photophores as a biological flash gun, the way a photographer uses a camera flash to illuminate a dark room for a fraction of a second. This use of bioluminescence as an active hunting tool, rather than as camouflage, communication, or passive attraction, was a genuinely new discovery. It added yet another dimension to our understanding of the remarkable versatility of bioluminescence as a biological tool in the deep ocean, and it raised immediate questions about how widespread this strategy might be among other deep-sea squid species, questions that researchers are still working to answer. The Taningia danai is also remarkable for its swimming behavior. Despite its considerable size and weight, footage of these animals shows them to be extremely fast and maneuverable swimmers, capable of the kind of quick directional changes that are characteristic of active pursuit predators. Without the long feeding tentacles that would otherwise be their primary capture tool, they appear to rely on a combination of speed, their powerful arms, and those dramatic light flashes to catch and subdue prey. The combination of speed, size, weaponized bioluminescence, and powerful arms makes this one of the more formidable predators in the mesopelagic realm, and one of the most fascinating examples of deep-sea evolutionary innovation. We have been exploring individual species and their remarkable adaptations, but let us pause for a moment and think about a broader question. What does it actually feel like to be a squid? What is the subjective experience, if there is one, of living in the deep ocean? What does the squid's world look and feel and sound like from the inside? This is, of course, a question that science cannot fully answer. We cannot get inside the mind of any animal, and the philosophical questions around animal consciousness and subjective experience are among the most difficult in all of biology. But we can look at what we know about squid physiology and behavior and try to construct a reasonable picture of what the sensory world of a deep-sea squid might be like. Start with vision. We have already talked about the extraordinary eyes of the giant squid and the colossal squid, but even the smaller, more ordinary squid species have visual systems of remarkable sophistication. Squid eyes are structurally very similar to vertebrate eyes. They have a cornea, a lens, a retina, and a fovea, a region of high visual acuity at the center of the visual field. They can focus on objects at different distances by moving the lens, just as the vertebrate eye can. And they are extraordinarily sensitive to light, optimized for detecting contrast and movement in low light conditions in a way that surpasses what most human eyes can do in similar conditions. But here's a fascinating paradox. Squids are almost certainly colorblind. Their retinas contain only one type of photoreceptor, a single type of light-sensitive cell, while human eyes contain 3 different types, allowing us to distinguish between a wide range of colors. A squid, according to the standard model of how color vision works, should see the world entirely in shades of gray, unable to tell the difference between red and green or blue and yellow. And yet squids are capable of producing extraordinarily complex and precisely differentiated color patterns across their skin, patterns that vary in hue as well as in brightness and pattern. Why would an animal produce complex colored patterns if it cannot see colors? This apparent paradox has puzzled researchers for decades, and several hypotheses have been proposed. One intriguing possibility involves the shape of the squid's pupil. While most vertebrate animals have either circular or slit-shaped pupils, many squid species have unusually shaped pupils, including some with a distinctive W-shaped or U-shaped pupil that some researchers have proposed may function to allow different wavelengths of light to focus on the retina simultaneously, essentially allowing the squid to distinguish colors through a mechanism quite different from the 3-receptor system that vertebrates use. If this hypothesis is correct, and it is still a subject of active research and debate, it would mean that squids have evolved a completely independent solution to the problem of color vision, one that we did not suspect existed until recently. Beyond vision, squids are sensitive to a range of other sensory inputs. They have a lateral line system, a sensory system widespread among fish but not often discussed in the context of cephalopods, that allows them to detect water movements and pressure waves. This system gives them a kind of distant touch sense, allowing them to detect the movement of water caused by nearby animals, even in conditions of complete darkness. They also have statocysts, organs of balance and acceleration detection, that are among the most sophisticated in any invertebrate, allowing the squid to maintain precise orientation and control of its position even in dark, featureless deep ocean water where there are no visual landmarks to navigate by. And squids can detect sound not in the same way that vertebrates with ears hear sound, but through their statocysts and through sensitivity to low-frequency pressure waves in the water. Low-frequency sounds travel extraordinarily well through water, much better than they travel through air, and the ocean is full of sound, from the calls of whales to the sounds made by ships on the surface to the crackling of biological activity in reef environments. Whether squids use this sensitivity to sound for navigation, for predator detection, or for communication with members of their own species remains an open question, but the sensitivity is clearly present and presumably serves some important function. Put all of this together, the acute low-light visual system, the lateral line sensitivity, the precise balance and orientation sense, the sensitivity to pressure waves and sound, and you begin to see the outline of a sensory world very different from our own, but extraordinarily rich in its own way. The squid in the deep ocean is not blind and deaf in the darkness, struggling to make sense of a featureless void. It is an animal tuned to precisely the signals that matter in its environment, reading the water around it with a sophistication that we are only beginning to appreciate. This brings us naturally to a discussion of the most remarkable aspect of squid biology, the aspect that, perhaps more than any other, challenges our assumptions about what intelligence is and where it can be found. We are talking about the squid nervous system. The first thing to know about the squid nervous system is its size. Squids have a brain, a real brain, a centralized processing organ located in the head, between the eyes and behind the beak. But the brain is only part of the story. A squid's nervous system extends far beyond its brain, into its arms and tentacles. And here is the number that most people find genuinely astonishing. In many squid species, the majority of the animal's total neurons, in some estimates, as many as 2/3 of all the neurons in the entire animal, are located not in the brain but in the arms. 2/3, let that number sit for a moment. In a human being, essentially all of our neurons are in our brain and spinal cord, with a relatively small number in the peripheral nervous system. Our limbs do not think. They respond to signals from the brain, they carry sensory information to the brain, but they do not process information independently. In a squid, the arms are different. Each arm contains its own nerve cord, its own ganglia, clusters of neurons, its own local processing capability. When a squid arm touches something, when a sucker makes contact with a surface, The arm does not simply relay that sensory information to the brain for processing and then wait for the brain to send back an instruction about what to do next. The arm processes the information locally and generates appropriate responses on its own. This means that a squid's arms are, in a very real sense, semi-autonomous. They have their own behavioral repertoire. They can explore, probe, grip, and manipulate objects without waiting for instructions from the central brain. The brain sets overall goals and provides high-level guidance, but the arms handle the details of execution themselves. It is a form of intelligence that is distributed through the body rather than concentrated in a single central organ, and it is quite unlike anything we see in vertebrate animals, including ourselves. The implications of this distributed nervous system are profound. First, it means that a squid can process sensory information about its physical environment much faster than a centralized system would allow. There is no delay while the signal travels to the brain, gets processed, and a return signal travels back to the arm. The arm handles it locally, in real time. Second, it means that the squid can simultaneously manage multiple complex physical interactions. Each arm can be doing something different, responding to its own local environment without creating a bottleneck in the central brain. Third, it means that the cognitive demands on the central brain are reduced. Instead of having to manage the fine details of all physical interactions, the brain can focus on higher-level decisions about strategy, navigation, and long-term goals. This architecture has deep implications for our understanding of what intelligence is and how it can be organized. In the vertebrate world, we tend to assume that intelligence is a function of brain size and complexity, that bigger, more complex brains mean smarter animals, and there is certainly truth to this in vertebrate biology. But the squid challenges this assumption by demonstrating that complex, sophisticated behavior can emerge from a very different kind of neural architecture, one that distributes processing power through the body rather than concentrating it in a single organ. Researchers studying octopus and squid arms, and it is worth noting that octopuses, which are closely related to squids, have an even more dramatically distributed nervous system, have found that isolated arm tissue continues to respond to tactile stimulation with coordinated, purposeful-looking movements, even when it is completely separated from the animal's brain. The arm in isolation still reaches out and explores, still responds to contact, still produces organized patterns of muscular activity. It is as if the arm has its own primitive intentions, its own local behavioral program that continues to run even in the absence of any central direction. This is not true intelligence in the full sense that we attribute to human consciousness, of course. But it is something genuinely remarkable and genuinely different from anything we see in the vertebrate nervous system. And it raises questions that biologists and neuroscientists and philosophers of mind are actively grappling with. What does it mean to have a nervous system that is distributed through the body in this way? What is the subjective experience, if any, of an animal organized this way? Is there a single self in a squid, or is there a kind of committee of semi-autonomous agents, the brain and the 8 or 10 partially independent arms, somehow coordinating to produce behavior that, from the outside, looks purposeful and unified? These are not idle philosophical speculations. They are questions with real scientific content, and answering them will require both better observational data about squid behavior in the wild and deeper understanding of how the distributed nervous system actually works at the level of individual neurons and neural circuits. The squid nervous system is, in this sense, one of the great frontiers of neuroscience, a completely different model of how to build a nervous system, one that evolution arrived at independently of the vertebrate lineage, and that may have lessons to teach us about the nature of intelligence itself. While we are on the subject of things that squids can do that continue to astonish scientists, let us talk about chromatophores. We have mentioned color change several times already in this documentary, but the full story of how squids change color and how they use that ability deserves more careful attention because it is one of the most sophisticated biological systems we know of. A chromatophore is a cell-containing pigment, in the case of squids, typically pigments of orange, red, yellow, or brown that can be rapidly expanded or contracted. When a chromatophore is contracted, its pigment is concentrated in a tiny dot and is essentially invisible. When it is expanded, stretched out by tiny muscles connected to the edge of the cell, the pigment spreads across a much larger area and becomes visible as a spot of color in the skin. A squid's skin contains millions of chromatophores, each connected to the nervous system and individually controllable. allowing the animal to produce almost any pattern of spots, stripes, bands, or gradients across its skin with extraordinary speed and precision. But chromatophores are only one layer of the color change system. Beneath the chromatophores lie two more layers of specialized optical cells. The first are called iridophores, cells that do not contain pigment but instead reflect light. The way they reflect light depends on the spacing of thin protein layers within the cell, and this spacing can be actively changed by the animal, shifting the wavelength, the color of the reflected light. The iridophores are what give squids their metallic, iridescent sheens, the blues and greens and silvers that ripple across their skin and shift as the animal moves and the angle of the light changes. Below the iridophores are leucophores, cells filled with tiny reflective spheres that scatter light in all directions. Leucophores produce a white, diffuse reflection that forms the bright background against which the chromatophore patterns are displayed. The combined effect of all three layers, the colored, expandable chromatophores on top, the wavelength-shifting iridophores in the middle, and the diffuse white reflecting leucophores at the bottom, is a display system of extraordinary complexity and flexibility. By controlling the expansion state of millions of individual chromatophores while simultaneously adjusting the optical properties of the iridophores, a squid can produce patterns of almost any color, contrast, texture, and rhythm across its skin. And it can do this in real time, changing the pattern from one moment to the next, with the entire skin acting as a single coordinated display, essentially a living television screen. The speed at which this system operates is genuinely difficult to believe. Squid color changes can occur in as little as 1 millisecond, 1,000th of a second. That is faster than the nervous system can conduct a signal from the brain to a muscle and get a response. The speed is achieved partly by having the control signals for the chromatophores built into the local neural networks of the skin itself, so that changes can be triggered locally rather than having to wait for a signal from the central brain. What are all these color changes used for? The answer, as far as we can tell, is everything. Squids use color change for camouflage, producing textures and patterns that closely match the substrate they are resting on, whether sand, rock, coral, or open water. They use color change for communication, signaling to potential mates, warning rivals, advertising aggression or submission. They use color change for prey capture. Some species use flashing color patterns to confuse or mesmerize prey before striking. And they use color change for defense, producing startling patterns designed to surprise or intimidate predators, or breaking up the outline of their body to make them harder to detect. In each of these contexts, the color change system is doing something fundamentally different, serving a different function, driven by a different motivation, targeted at a different recipient. And the squid brain must be capable of orchestrating all of these different uses of the same system, switching between them as circumstances demand. The fact that it can do this, that an animal with a brain roughly the size of a walnut can manage a display system of this complexity across a skin that may contain up to 2 million individual chromatophores, is a testament to the extraordinary efficiency and sophistication of the squid nervous system. As we approach the end of the first part of this journey, let us zoom out from individual animals and their remarkable adaptations and begin to think about the bigger picture, about where squids fit in the ocean ecosystem and why they matter for the health of the planet as a whole. The ocean is not simply a body of water. It is a functioning system, a vast, complex, interconnected web of biological, chemical, and physical processes that together regulate the chemistry of the atmosphere and the climate of the entire planet. And one of the most important processes in this system is the movement of carbon. Carbon enters the ocean from the atmosphere, dissolved in seawater. In the sunlit surface zone, phytoplankton, the microscopic plant-like organisms we mentioned at the beginning of this documentary, use sunlight to convert dissolved carbon dioxide into organic carbon, incorporating it into their bodies as they grow. This organic carbon then moves up the food chain as phytoplankton are eaten by zooplankton, which are eaten by small fish, and squid, which are eaten by larger predators. At each step in the food chain, some of the carbon is released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide through respiration, but some of it remains locked in the bodies of living organisms. Now here is where squids play a crucial role. Many squid species undertake daily vertical migrations. They spend the daylight hours in the deeper, darker water of the mesopelagic zone, where they are safer from visual predators, and then rise to the surface or near surface waters at night to feed on the abundant life there. These migrations can span hundreds of meters in vertical distance, and they happen every day around the clock in every ocean on Earth. When a squid feeds at the surface at night, it incorporates carbon from the surface food web into its body tissues. When it descends to depth during the day, it takes that carbon with it. And when it defecates at depth or dies at depth, that carbon is released deep in the ocean, far from the surface where it might easily return to the atmosphere. This process is part of what oceanographers call the biological carbon pump, and it is one of the primary mechanisms by which the ocean removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it in the deep ocean, where it may remain for hundreds or thousands of years. Squids are not the only animals that contribute to the biological carbon pump. Many species of fish, crustaceans, and gelatinous organisms make the same daily vertical migrations. But squids are among the most abundant and widely distributed of the vertical migrators, and their contribution to the total flux of carbon from surface to deep is substantial. Estimates of the total biomass of mesopelagic squids alone, the squids that live in the twilight zone and migrate daily, run into the tens of millions of metric tons. The total amount of carbon that this biomass transports from surface to deep every day across all the world's oceans is enormous. This is not an abstract or academic point. The ocean's biological carbon pump is one of the key regulators of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Without it, if the organisms that drive this pump were to disappear, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would be substantially higher than it is now, and the climate of the planet would be substantially warmer. The squids, along with the rest of the mesopelagic community of animals that make their daily migrations between light and dark, sunlit and deep, are playing a role in the regulation of the global climate that is only now beginning to be fully appreciated and quantified by scientists. In this sense, the squids are not just fascinating objects of biological study. They are important in a practical planetary sense. They are part of the machinery that keeps the ocean, and through the ocean, the entire planet, in something resembling a stable equilibrium. And to the extent that human activities, including climate change, ocean acidification, and commercial fishing, affect squid populations and their behavioral patterns, those activities are potentially affecting the functioning of one of the most important climate-regulating systems on Earth. The full implications of this are complex, and researchers are still working to quantify exactly how important squid vertical migration is to the overall carbon pump and how sensitive it is to environmental changes. But the broad outline is clear. These animals, which we have spent this documentary marveling at for their evolutionary history and their physiological adaptations and their behavioral sophistication, are also players in the largest-scale physical and chemical processes on the planet. They are not separate from the Earth's climate system. They are part of it. We will explore these ecological themes and much more in the second part of our journey into the deep. We will look more closely at how modern researchers are using new technologies to study these animals in their natural habitat, at what the future of deep-sea exploration holds, and at what the squids can teach us about evolution, intelligence, and the potential for life in extreme environments beyond our own planet. We will go deeper, both literally and figuratively, into the darkness where these animals live, following them into the midnight zone and beyond, tracing the full depth of their ecological importance, and confronting the urgent questions about their future in an ocean that is changing rapidly due to human activities. But for now, let us stay with the image we have built over the course of this first part, an image of animals that are simultaneously ancient and modern, simple and sophisticated, familiar and utterly alien. An image of creatures that have survived 500 million years of Earth's history, that have evolved solutions to the problems of life in extreme environments that continue to astonish scientists, and that play roles in the functioning of the global ocean that we are only beginning to understand. An image of the squids not as monsters, not as seafood, not as creatures of mythology, but as what they truly are, some of the most remarkable products of evolution that this planet has ever produced. The ocean is their home. The darkness is their native element, and they have been there in the deep, in the cold, in the dark, long before we arrived, and they will be there if we are wise enough and careful enough to protect them long after we are gone. This is their story, and it is a story worth knowing. Welcome back to one of the most extraordinary journeys our planet has to offer. In the first part of this documentary, we trace the evolutionary origins of squids across more than 500 million years of Earth's history, from the shelled and ancient cephalopods of the Cambrian seas all the way through to the diverse and remarkable animals alive in our oceans today. We explored the sunlit and twilight zones of the ocean, met the firefly squid in its extraordinary bioluminescent migrations, descended into the territory of the giant squid and the colossal squid, and began to understand how these animals are woven into the fabric of the global ocean ecosystem in ways that matter for the health of the entire planet. Now we go deeper. In this second part, we are going to push further into the darkness, into the parts of the ocean that are most remote, most extreme, and most poorly understood. We are going to look at the full technological revolution that has transformed deep-sea biology over the past several decades, and at the specific tools and methods that researchers use today to observe squids and other deep-sea animals in their natural habitat without disturbing them. We are going to explore what happens at the very bottom of the ocean and what squids have to do with even those most extreme environments. We are going to return to the neural complexity of squids and think more carefully about what their remarkable nervous systems might mean for our understanding of intelligence and consciousness. And we are going to confront, honestly and directly, the threats that squids in the deep ocean face in a world that is changing faster than at almost any point in recent geological history. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos, because what lies ahead in this second hour of our journey is as astonishing, as beautiful, and as important as anything we have already covered. Let us begin where part 1 ended, with the biological carbon pump and the question of ecological importance. We established that squids, through their daily vertical migrations, play a significant role in transporting carbon from the surface ocean to the deep. But this is only one piece of a much larger ecological picture, and to appreciate the full scope of the squid's importance to ocean ecosystems, we need to think about energy flow, about how energy moves through the ocean food web, and what happens when you remove a major component of that web. Energy enters the ocean food web at the surface through photosynthesis. Phytoplankton capture sunlight and use it to build organic molecules. Those organic molecules are then consumed by zooplankton, tiny animals including copepods, krill, and the larval stages of many larger species, which extract energy from the phytoplankton tissue and build their own bodies. The zooplankton are in turn consumed by small fish, by jellyfish, by larval squids, and by a host of other small predators. And those small predators are consumed by larger ones, including adult squids of many species. In this energy transfer chain, squids occupy a particularly important middle position. They are what ecologists call mesopredators, animals that are large enough to be effective predators of the zooplankton and small fish that feed on phytoplankton, but small enough to themselves be prey for the ocean's largest predators. In this middle position, squids act as conduits, as channels through which the energy captured by phytoplankton at the surface is efficiently transferred to the large, charismatic predators at the top of the food chain. Consider the sperm whale. We discussed the relationship between giant squids and sperm whales in the first part of this documentary, but the dietary dependence of sperm whales on squid is far broader than just the giant squid. Studies of sperm whale diets have found that squid of many different species, from the deep-sea giants to much smaller mesopelagic species, can account for 80% or more of the total food consumed by these whales in some populations. An adult male sperm whale needs approximately 1 ton of food per day to meet its energy requirements. Across a global population of roughly 360,000 sperm whales, that represents a total squid consumption of extraordinary scale. Sperm whales are not the only large predators that depend heavily on squid. Pilot whales, which are actually large dolphins rather than true whales, feed almost exclusively on squid and are found in all the world's major oceans. Many species of albatross, the great soaring seabirds that range across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, feed predominantly on squid, plucking them from the surface at night when the squids rise to feed. Elephant seals, which can dive to depths of more than 1,000 meters, feed heavily on squid during their deep-water foraging. Large predatory fish, including bluefin tuna, swordfish, and mako sharks, all consume significant quantities of squid. Even some seabirds that spend most of their time near the coast, including penguins in the Southern Ocean, have squid as a major component of their diet. If you were to remove squids from the ocean, if some catastrophic event were to dramatically reduce squid populations globally, the consequences would ripple up through the food web with devastating speed. Sperm whale populations would collapse, albatross populations would crash. The productivity of fisheries that target tuna and swordfish, which themselves feed heavily on squid, would decline sharply. The entire structure of ocean food webs, from the poles to the tropics, from the surface to the deep, would be profoundly disrupted. And through those disruptions, the carbon pump would be weakened, the cycling of nutrients through the ocean would be altered, and the effects would ultimately reach into the atmosphere and the climate. This is not a hypothetical scenario designed simply to illustrate a point. It is a real possibility, a possibility that concerns ecologists and oceanographers because of the known sensitivity of squid populations to environmental change and because of the pace at which the ocean environment is currently changing. We will return to this concern later in this documentary. But for now, let us carry forward the understanding that squids are not peripheral to the ocean ecosystem. They are central to it in multiple interconnected ways, and their health is inseparable from the health of the ocean as a whole. With that ecological context established, let us now turn to one of the most exciting developments in the history of deep-sea biology: the technological revolution that has made it possible to actually observe squids and other deep-sea animals in their natural habitat for the first time. Because for most of the history of marine biology, what we knew about deep-sea animals was based almost entirely on what washed up dead on beaches or was brought up in trawl nets, and both of these sources give a deeply incomplete and often misleading picture of what life in the deep ocean is actually like. Think about what happens to an animal when it is caught in a deep-sea trawl net. The net is dragged through the water at whatever depth the target animals are living, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of meters below the surface. As the net fills with animals, those animals are subjected to turbulent water, physical collisions with other animals and with the net, and sometimes extreme changes in pressure as the net is hauled to the surface. By the time the net reaches the surface and is opened on the deck of the research vessel, many of the animals inside are dead or dying. Those that survive the physical ordeal of capture often die rapidly in the dramatically different temperature and pressure conditions of the surface. What the researchers then have to work with is a collection of damaged, often incomplete, sometimes partially decomposed specimens that can tell you a great deal about anatomy but very little about behavior. The same is true, in a different way, of animals that wash ashore dead or dying. These are individuals that have died for unknown reasons: illness, injury, old age, the aftermath of a predator attack, and that have drifted to the surface and then been carried to shore by currents. They are by definition not representative of healthy, normal members of their species. They may have injuries or pathologies that affected their condition at the time of death, and the process of dying and drifting and washing ashore will have further altered their appearance and anatomy. So again, while stranded animals provide valuable information about species existence and basic anatomy, they cannot tell us much about how those animals actually live. The revolution began, as so many revolutions do, with a new technology. In this case, the technology was the remotely operated vehicle, the ROV. An ROV is essentially a sophisticated robot submarine, a vehicle equipped with thrusters for maneuvering, cameras for observation, lights for illumination, and often with manipulator arms for collecting samples. Unlike a crewed submarine, an ROV is tethered to the surface ship by a cable through which power is delivered to the vehicle and through which control signals and video data are transmitted. The ROV operator sits on the surface ship, looking at a video monitor showing the view from the ROV's cameras, and controls the vehicle with a joystick, essentially playing a very high-stakes video game with a robot submarine thousands of meters below. The first ROVs capable of reaching significant depths were developed in the 1970s and 1980s, primarily for commercial applications, for inspecting oil and gas pipelines, for recovering equipment lost on the seabed, and for other industrial purposes. But scientists quickly recognized the potential of these vehicles for deep-sea biological research, and over the following decades, ROVs became increasingly central to the work of deep-sea biologists. Vehicles like the MBARI, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, ROVs Ventana and Doc Ricketts, and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's JASON have together logged thousands of hours of deep-sea observation time, and the video archives they have accumulated represent an irreplaceable record of deep-sea life. But early ROV observations of deep-sea animals, including squids, were often frustrating. The animals, it turned out, did not behave naturally when approached by a brightly lit, noisy, mechanically complex vehicle. The bright white lights used by most ROVs to illuminate their working environment were visible from enormous distances in the otherwise dark, deep ocean, and many animals responded to the approaching light by fleeing, hiding, or exhibiting stress behaviors.